So, a brief introduction. Dr. Kishore Ji Kulkarni has been a distinguished professor of economics at Metropolitan State University of Denver since 1989. He has also taught at the University of Colorado, University of Denver, Colorado State University, and Colorado School of Mines as an adjunct professor. Dr. Kulkarni completed a BA in economics, receiving a first rank in merit, and MA in economics, receiving second rank in merit from the University of Pune. He migrated to United States in 1976 and completed an additional MA and PhD in economics from the University of Pittsburgh. He has been teaching at MSU Denver since 1989. Kulkarni has also taught as an affiliate professor at University of Colorado in Boulder, Cornell School of International Studies at the University of Denver, Colorado State University, and Colorado School of Mines. He has received numerous awards over the years, including the Distinguished Service Award in 2004 and Extraordinary Service Award handed by University President in 2010 from MSU Denver. Kulkarni was recognized as the first distinguished professor in College of Business by the Dean at MSU Denver in May 2017. Non-resident Indians Welfare Society of India honored him with the Parvasi Ratna Award, and in March 2019, the Federation of Business Disciples recognized him as the Outstanding Education Award recipient. He also co-founded Indian Journal of Economics and Business, which he is managing from 2001 to 2016. Professor Kulkarni has co-authored and contributed to 9 books, some of which have become well-known textbooks adoptions in American and Indian universities. The 6th edition of his Principles of Macro-Monetary Economics textbook was published in 2019. Kulkarni has authored and co-authored 160 refereed journal articles in Global Business Review, Indian Economic Journal, and Indian Journal of Economics. Sorry. So, as we see, he has a very distinguished career as a professor, as a researcher. So, I directly now invite him to speak on the subject. So, it is over to Professor Kulkarni.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Ratan Chand and Dr. Singh for inviting me to this webinar. And it has been a great pleasure to know Dr. Charan Singh for almost 35 years. We have been friends for for all these numerous years when he visited US and all. We met several times. We met in Mumbai couple of times. So I think his friendship is very valuable friendship for me. It's only 7:30 a.m. In Denver, Colorado, where I am, and it's a Friday. So who gets up that early on Friday? But I did because he is my dear friend, and his invitation I consider as a privilege to speak to all of you. And when I look at this audience and some of the familiar names in the audience, I'm very excited to be with you and to talk to you about today's topic. I know the topic we have selected is U.S. losing the leadership position, and what is going to happen to the world economy in general, U.S. in particular. And those of you who are in a hurry to leave for whatever reason, let me summarize my answer in just 3 words. My answer is yes and no. And yeah, so I think we can finish this seminar in 2 minutes because US is in fact losing the leadership position, and no, we will talk. But I think that's joke apart. Let me let me continue arguing why it is losing the leadership position. We'll probably talk about why it may not lose the leadership position, and what does future look like. Now, in around 2015, 2016 time period, one of my brilliant co-authors, a lady named Penny Prime, who teaches in Georgia State University, she and we started talking about a topic to do, and that was what is happening to the world economy, and are we looking at a total world slowdown um, because of the financial crisis that occurred from 2008 to 2012 in US. So, and our question was, who will lead the global economy now? And I know in that article, and we researched it, we wrote it, and in 2019 issue of Global Business Review, we have that article. But the title of that article is Global Slowdown, and who will be the new leader, who will be the new leader of the global economy, who will lead the global economy. And in that article, we do basically, and let me summarize because that is quite relevant here. We argued in that article that the global economy has only few industrial giants as the leaders. Namely, of course, if the world GDP is considered to be roughly $96 trillion, and let's just make it for the calculation purposes to $100 trillion. Out of that $100 trillion, 23 trillion dollars is produced by US alone. So US obviously has roughly 24% of the world GDP. But then the second and very close second is China. China has about 22 trillion dollars worth of GDP in nominal numbers, obviously. So that 23 plus 22, that's $45 trillion is produced by only two industrial giants, US and China. Added to that number three, Japan, which about $5 trillion worth of GDP. Germany, 4 trillion, and then there are several others from 2.5 or 3 to 4 trillion. Namely, of course, India is there. Canada, UK, France, Singapore, add all those together, and then the numbers really start going down. But then from 2 to 3, with China being 22 trillion to 3, Japan, which is 5 trillion, the number really goes down from 23 to 5. But if you add Japan and Germany as 10, added to that to 45% of before, you got 55%. Majority of the world GDP is produced by these four industrial giants. And in our article, we visit each of these countries and find out that there are some economic challenges all these four countries are experiencing. And because of those economic challenges, we expected that the global economic growth is probably going to slow down unless there is a significant leader of economic growth. And I know India is trying to become the leader of the world in terms of 6%, 4% GDP growth. But mind well, India's nominal GDP is about 3 trillion, and because of that 3 trillion having 6%, and that small number doesn't do much to the $96 trillion global GDP. So India is a leader, but not a very significant leader, because our size in comparison to the world is not really that great as yet. And therefore, we concluded that article by saying that we do need either a big boost from all these four economies, or we need a brand new leader who can really do somewhat same magical numbers game like China did from 1990 to 2010. And we were just putting that question to the reader there. That was the article as I said, in Global Business Review with Penny Prime and me. Now, after we published that article, lo and behold, the things got much worse because of pandemic. In March of 2020, things got so bad that U.S. Had a quarterly, second quarter of 2020, we had a GDP growth of minus 15 because of all the shutdown for 2-3 weeks, and you guys are quite familiar with that. The shutdown was so severe that everything stopped working. And I know at that time I had a little radio interview here in Denver, and the interviewer asked me, what do I expect to happen? And obviously I didn't know anything. I'm a poor economist. And I said, well, I don't know, but I know one thing, and that is the longer we stay away from our jobs, worse this is going to get. And therefore I am really worried when we come back to our jobs and start the productivity, start the production, and how we rebound. I also expressed in that interview a full confidence in researchers of not just the US, but the researchers of all over the world who will probably come up with the solution for this problem. Why he my statement of the longer we stay away from the job, worse it will get, and we have to go back to the job. That statement didn't fly very well with that interviewer. He got kind of mad at me. He said, are you saying that we shouldn't be staying at home? I said, well, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that longer we stay, worse it gets. And it has possibly, it could have been worse if we had not found the vaccination and the social distancing strategy and all the things that we took care of. In my opinion, we took a little longer to rebound than we did. I thought this will be over in 4 to 6 months, and we will get the medication and we will do a better job of rebounding. But none of those things happened. We took a full year and a half to rebound, and now it's about 3 years from almost 3 years from March of 2020. I think we are in a shape now to say that the rebound is kind of complete. Almost 90% of rebound is there, barring aside some amazing sectors which have not rebounded as good as some other sectors. But I think the rebounds is probably at least 85 to 90% complete in case of US, and I know India is doing very well too in terms of coming back to the productivity, coming back to the so-called normal, and barring aside any future shocks, negative shocks, I think we will do okay. So the question is then, what about this leadership position of US? As the numbers state right now, US still is the leader. 23-24% of the world GDP is produced in US. So clearly US is still the leader. China is knocking on the door, but one important point is that if absolute numbers of GDP are very close to each other for US and China, the per capita income is not, because if you divide the population, which is like 3 times higher for China, more than 3 times higher for China than US, then the per capita GDP of US is still going to be 3 times better than the Chinese per capita GDP. So in terms of the threat of China to US as the leader of the world, that threat is only in terms of the numbers of GDP. The value of the production that China produces is threatening, but the per capita income obviously is not, because US will still be 3 times better in terms of the per capita income. And I know that's why as far as the leadership of US is concerned, nobody is really threatening it until now. In the future, things can be different, because in a minute or two, I will tell you why I expect things are getting bad. And when you look at the things are getting bad, I know I did a little bit of research to talk to you. And in that research, it was clear that in 1960, for example, You ready for this? These are some amazing numbers that we can compare with. In 1960, the world GDP was roughly $4 trillion. As I said, now it is $96 trillion. But as early as in 1960, it was only $4 trillion, and almost 1 trillion, 1.2 trillion of that was produced in USA. So US had a pretty high share of 3.5 or 4 trillion uh, world GDP, which obviously means US was clearly producing 35 to 40% of the world GDP. And of course, it was single-handedly the world leader as far as the production is concerned. And 1960s gave US a big boost because thanks to the manufacturing sector, and 1960s became the most prosperous decade for US economy. And that was obviously the manufacturing sector. The new productions were being found. As you can imagine, 1960s we got television, radios, washer dryers, refrigerators, telephones, all that. Telephones, I mean, the desktop telephones in 1960s in US. Obviously, that manufacturing and cars, without doubt, the whole Detroit got a big boost of producing millions of cars by three major producers in the US. And that's why even in 1960s, the Beatles were singing and people were dancing on the street and calling themselves hippies. When hippies were dancing on the street and Beatles were singing, US was still busy producing a lot of GDP. And that's why 1960s became the most prosperous decade ever in the history of US. US never grew that fast as in 1960s. But then came 1970s, and in 1970s, we got some tremendous shocks, not just to the US economy, but the whole world economy. And for US, the shock was even more significant, and that came in 1973, the oil shock of OPEC. And OPEC raised the oil prices tremendously in 1973. And it goes without saying that US is so oil dependent that not only it is consumed for as a gasoline to cars, but it is an input to a big production structure in US. And just to give you a rough figure, before the OPEC shock, at the gas station, the gas was only 33 cents a gallon, and gallon is about 4.5 liters. So I know Indian gas stations talk in liters term, but 4.5 liters is a gallon. And per gallon, the price was only 33 cents. Well, after the shock, in less than 5 days or so, the price increased from 33 cents to 73 cents. So it more than doubled at the gas station. And with that tremendous increase in the gasoline price, as you can easily expect, there was a higher cost of production. The production went down, the investment declined, and we got a pretty severe dose of recession in 1974-75 in US economy. And that recession of 1975 created even more trouble for the US economy because 75, as we got a recession, the response of policymakers to that was even more expansionary. And I know Carter administration was there from 1976 to 1980. And as you just heard in the introduction, that I came to US in 1976. In fact, I finished my bachelor's in Pune in 74 and my master's in Gokhale Institute in 76. So 74, 76 was the time period when I started observing economic growth all over the world, and especially in US, obviously came in 76. So I have been observing US economy first-handedly right from 76 onwards. So that's almost about 47 years this year. So yeah, I know people call me old. Charan Singh just says you are so old that when you went to college there were no history classes. because the history was not even made there. But in in terms of coming back to 47 years, I have been observing 47 years of U.S. economy, and clearly 76, 77, 78, 79, we had a very rough period because the monetary policy didn't know what to do. They were blindly so increasing the money supply. There was a continuous reduction in production because of the high cost of production. There was no technological change as such of a significant number, and therefore we got what is called a stagflation. In fact, in 1980, when President Reagan ran against President Carter, Reagan came up with a new term called misery index. And he said misery index is the inflation rate of the economy plus the unemployment rate of the economy. And if you calculate that misery index as inflation rate plus unemployment rate, then the misery index of the 4 years of Carter administration was the highest ever in the history of US. So no president has created such a economic havoc as the President Carter did. And I know President Reagan in presidential debates, that was the first time he did it. That's why we all remember it, that he actually brought a chart in the debate podium, and he actually showed on the stage a chart of misery index, and he showed that this is the worst a president can do. And I know Carter was a very nice guy in terms of humanity and in terms of being a good-natured president. He was a wonderful fellow, and I had a chance to say hello to him one time also. But clearly he was a very gentleman, and he still is. And I know he's 93, 95 now, but he still does a lot of humanity work. But then he had no answer to that amazing accusations, and of course the realistic accusations that Reagan candidate showed. And Carter lost the election like 57-43 or something like that. Very hands down victory in 1980 for Reagan. But 1980s obviously started very badly because of the stagflation problem. One response was a monetarist argument of 1979 when Paul Volcker became the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. And Paul Volcker was a very strong monetarist. And those of you who are paying attention to US economic growth, you would probably know that Paul Volcker announced in October 1979 that enough is enough. We are going to keep the money supply growth under check. Doesn't matter what happens to the interest rate. And sure enough, they, for a while, at least 2-3 years, they checked the money supply to no more than 2 or 3 or 4%. And with that small increase in the liquidity and cash and M1 and M2 money supply, we had a amazing increase in the interest rate. In 1982, US interest rate reached to first time ever 20% and more. So in first quarter of 1982, Bank of America charged 20.5% interest rate as the prime rate. And because of that increase in interest rate, obviously investment went down and GDP went down further. Prices were kind of stabilizing, but in 1982 we got the most severe recession after Great Depression in US, and that recession of 1982 put a big damper on the US economic growth. But then 1982, a reduction in inflation, the confidence in the system, and most importantly, the computer revolution of 1980s started taking shape. And that computer revolution of 1980s created a big boost in the later half of 1980s, and the US economy started growing very fast. In fact, the 1960s record of the most prosperous decade ever in the history of US was broken by 1980s. And in 1980s, we had, as I said, a amazing recovery. One time Reagan was on a program, a TV program, 60 Minutes program, and the question there was, what do you think is the most important achievement of your 1980 to 1988 reign in the White House? And Reagan spent no time in answering that question. He said, without doubt, it is the economic recovery that I led from 1982 recession to 1988 prosperity. And I know he single-handedly took the credit for that. In my opinion, a large amount of credit has to be given to the technological revolution. But that's, and I know, if you know Paul Romer, the Nobel Prize winner in economics, the Romer theory will probably tell us that economic growths are mainly engined and led by the technological growth. And I think Paul Romer is in a way right that you have to have a technology. I will make my point more clear when we come to 1990s, because the 1980s recovery from 82 to 88, of course, Reagan was in the White House up to 88. George Bush was the senior George Bush was the president from 88 to 92. So Republicans were in the White House from 80 to 1992. And clearly under their White House leadership, there was a tremendous recovery in the US economy. But then came 1990s, and as George Bush lost the election of 1992 and Clinton became the president in 1990s, we got an amazing boost to the technology one more time, because in 1990s boost of the cell phone, the information technology, the computer technology, continuing with it was unprecedented. That type of technological growth US has not seen before. Mind well, 1960s growth was engineered by manufacturing sector. 1980s was manufactured 1980s growth was engineered by computer technology, and 1990s was clearly it was the information technology, the cell phones and computers and the website and everything else that we are using these days. The origins of that can be found in 1990s. So great was that technological boost that I know I'm an old timer, but those of you who are old timers in the audience, they would remember the late 1990s and the US stock market growth. And I know Dr. Charan Singh was visiting in those days to US, so he remembers how fast the stock market was growing, even on a daily basis, guys. And I'm talking about the daily basis. Daily basis, there was 3 times, 4 times increase in the stock of network companies. There was Juniper Network, Sycamore Network, and all kinds of Motorola and all Ericsson, and all these internet companies were having the heck of a time in terms of the stock market and the stock value. The minute company would announce their future and what their expectations are the future, one time Motorola said, we expect 2 billion cell phones in the world by 2010, and therefore we expect an increase in our company size by 5 times. Well, the stock went up by 6 times right on the same day. Speaking from my personal interesting experience, I remember one time in 1997, I bought a stock of a company which had a value of about $35 in the morning. In the afternoon, the stock was 131, and I made like $25,000 in one stock on that day. I came home and I told my wife, I can't believe this is the real money, because I can't even believe that our savings account or our savings are increasing this fast. So much was a positive expectations for the future. So much was in general, great feeling in everybody's mind that there was no stopping. There was no stopping. And the 1990s clearly became the most prosperous decade ever in the history of US. They broke the record of 1980s. And therefore, those who are born in 1980, they didn't see a bad US economy from 1980 all the way up to 2000, almost 20 years or so. That generation of US born people, they didn't know what a economic growth, no economic growth really means, because they had never seen one. And 1990s then became the most prosperous decade. GDP increased tremendously in those days, because remember, in 1960, US GDP was roughly $1.2 trillion, and it became $20 trillion in 2000, well, not but $18 trillion by 1990s, and 20 in 20s, 2010s and all. So clearly, there was a tremendous boost in the GDP number as such, thanks to this information technology. And mind well, if 1980s were the most prosperous decade ever in the history of US, 1990s were the most prosperous decade ever in the history of US, breaking the record of 1980s. And guess what? While 1980s were led by Republicans in the White House, 1990s were led by Democrats in the White House, because 92 to 2000 was the Clinton era, 2 terms in a row. And well, pun intended, but you guys know what Clinton was doing in the White House. What does that mean? That means presidents don't matter, guys. It doesn't matter who is in the White House, Republican or Democrats. When the economy has to grow, it will grow. And as I said, that's why Paul Volcker probably got the Nobel Prize, because he argued that it is the technological change that is the most important driver of economic growth. And therefore, and I think that is the modern argument, and that is in a way the right argument, because in modern times, everything depends upon the technology and the technological growth, and therefore that's what 1980s and 1990s show. Question is then, if 80s and 90s were most prosperous, what the heck went wrong? And what went wrong is starting with, of course, the events of 9/11 in 2001. And 9/11 obviously made a pretty big dent in the US economy, and not just in terms of losing roughly 250 to $300 billion, direct and indirect effect of that attack, because the towers themselves were $50 billion worth each, and then make a multiplier effect of that, and we got roughly $300 billion worth shock to the US economy. And I think that shock is important, and that's what studies calculate. But what is even more important is the expectations for the future. While 1990s were driven by a tremendous positive expectations for the future, 2001 really made it a very worrisome expectation for the future. And that worrisome expectations created a pessimism in the US economy. The growth in terms of GDP production slowed down, and more importantly, the growth in technology and the new research and development, because businesses were quite wary of what's going to happen in the future and how the political structure is going to change. Of course, we started the Iraq War after that, and the war created some more uncertainty in the mind of the businesses, and therefore, from 2001, we got some worrisome developments in the U.S. economy. And those of you who are paying attention to what else was important, what else was important is clearly what was happening in the banking sector. And Congress passed a law in 1999, where they allowed the commercial banks to get into the investment activities, and the financial institutions in the US started getting into the investment activities of all kinds, including the stocks. And then we got this derivative market, we got the mortgage-backed securities problem, and the banks started creating more and more loans to buy more and more mortgage-backed securities, which created humongous capital for them, but that also created a humongous risk in the banking system. And as that became a cumulative risk from 2004 to 2008, we reached in those 4 years such a banking panic that there were subprime loans, there was aggressive mortgage selling, some was illegal, some was immoral, and this immorality and illegality of giving loans to the public in those 4 years started seeing some bad effects of that in the form of the summer of 2008. And the summer of 2008, the crisis led to the two words are important: systemic risk. And the systemic risk was a risk to the whole financial system. And even the Federal Reserve Board chairman, Bernanke, that time declared that if Congress doesn't do anything, then we may not have an economy on Monday. Now, if Federal Reserve Board chairman says something weird like that, really speaking, nobody knows what the heck that means. That we will not have an economy on Monday, but that's what Bernanke said. And Bernanke's statement of that made Congress come together and pass TARP, Troubled Assets Recovery Program, TARP, which was worth $750 billion. So Congress gave the Treasury $750 billion, undoubtedly the largest expenditure item ever. 750 billion is close to, so it is a very big number. And obviously Congress authorized the Treasury to spend that much money and recover this financial crisis, which was creating the systemic risk. And therefore we got some trouble there. And then we had a very high budget deficit because of that. And that increase in the budget deficit created some worries for the fiscal policy, and same thing with the monetary policy. And the government actively got involved in solving these problems aggressively. That was the first time. TARP was clearly the start of government recognizing that sometimes crises can be averted uh, by uh, by increase in the government expenditure and increase in money supply, and we'll come to that in a minute. But increase in government expenditure and increase in money supply, crisis can be averted. That was the main lesson of the TARP, Troubled Assets Recovery Program, of September 2008. And George Bush Jr., even he was a Republican, he signed that expenditure of the Congress, and we got a big boost to control this banking crisis. And of course, the banking crisis created, well, that kind of a TARP expenditure created few other problems for us, but that's a different story. But then in 2008, just after signing the TARP in July, August, September, sometime then in 2008. In November of 2008, George W. Bush lost the election to President Obama, who openly said that you elect me and we will give you more change. Otherwise, we will go back to the Great Depression. So change was the main assurance of President Obama, and he spent no time in delivering that assurance as soon as he came in the White House in January of 2009. Because I know elections happen in November 2008, and presidents enter into the White House in January of next year, which is 2009 for President Obama. Well, he spent no more than 3 months to come up with another boost to the economy, and that's called ARRA, that American Recovery and Reconstruction Act. ARRA spent another $750 billion, one more boost about the same nature in less than 6 months, and total bill is $1.5 trillion in less than 6 months. And I know I'm making a big deal of these numbers because the whole government expenditure of 2008 was $2.4 trillion, and 1.5 was coming in just two bills. So almost the whole yearly expenditure was coming in two bills. That's what the point I'm trying to make. And because of this big boost to the US economy, we got a habit of creating a budget deficit. First time we increased the budget deficit in 2009, more than $1 trillion. $1.3 trillion was the budget deficit in 2009, 2010, 1.6 trillion. These are all record-breaking budget deficits. And in the first 4 years of Obama administration, almost every year we got more than $1 trillion budget deficit. So the change was there, but the budget deficit became a pretty important point. And as you guys probably know, that in 2008 to 2016, in those 8 years that Obama was in charge of fiscal policy making, in those 8 years, so much was the increase in government expenditure leading to a humongous budget deficit that every year we got roughly $1 trillion addition to the national debt of the US economy. In 2008, the national debt was $9 trillion. And that's when Obama entered the White House. In 2018, the national debt doubled. It added $9 trillion more to the national debt, and the national debt became $18 trillion in 2016 when Obama quit the office. And we got this national debt problem. And I know those economic critics who really want to point the fingers to the Obama administration. They say that all presidents taken together had allowed the US national debt to reach to $9 trillion. He single-handedly in 8 years added nine more, which means he allowed the national debt to increase to $18 trillion single-handedly, what all presidents taken together have done before him. And no wonder in 2016 or so, we got national debt as a major problem because $18 trillion, and in those days the GDP was close to 16, $17 trillion, which meant that the national debt became higher than the GDP. And the debt GDP ratio for US first time ever crossed the 100%, and it went to 120%. So bad was the situation that the bond rating companies had lowered the AAA rating of treasury bonds for 1 quarter there. And as there was a reduction in the AAA rating of the treasury bond, it was a worrisome situation. But fortunately, that percentage of 120% of debt GDP ratio declined a little bit. Now it is back to now it is back to more than 100 because we have $23 trillion roughly GDP. And those of you who are paying attention to the national debt, we have crossed it to $30 trillion now. So the national debt to GDP ratio has in fact gone up more than 100% now. Things are getting pretty bad, and therefore, I know my time limit of 45 to 50 minutes is coming to close. So let me conclude by saying that number one problem for the US economy is the debt GDP ratio, which I know in comparison to Japan, it is not very big. In comparison to many other economies, it is not very big. But in comparison to the US itself, on absolute scale, it is something which we have to worry about, because when this debt GDP ratio goes up too much, that's when the bond credit ratings start going down. Then you have to raise the interest rate on your bonds to sell them in the bond market, and the future problems start coming up. And that's why that is a pretty good indicator of how the economy is doing. And the US economy is not doing good. And because of the pandemic effects, which I know have been recovered recently in last 1 quarter or so, we have had again a very huge, humongous increase in the government expenditure. $3.6 trillion worth budget deficit in 2020 alone. 2021, it 3.6 trillion went to 2 trillion, and then 1.5 trillion. So now we are gotten into this habit of making an extremely expansionary fiscal policy and extremely expansionary monetary policy, because in last 3 years, and I know you should check these numbers, but M1 money supply of US has increased from $4 trillion roughly to $12 trillion, 300% increase in M1 money supply in just 3 years or so of the pandemic years. And no wonder then Federal Reserve is very aggressively increasing the interest rate, because they also are familiar with a very expansionary monetary policy they have undertaken in pandemic years, and now they have to block it somehow. So the interest rates are going up, which is affecting some business investment, and that will keep on affecting business investment as long as the interest rate keep going up. I just attended in November a Southern Economic Association where the chief guest and the chief speaker was the FOMC member and Atlanta Federal Reserve president, and he said, and which kind of confuses some monetary economists, he said that the Federal Reserve's objective is to have inflation rate of roughly 2%. Now, to me, when the inflation rate, even yesterday they announced inflation rate slowing down a little bit to 6.5%, but it was as high as 9.3% just 3-4 months ago. And when inflation rate is 9% and you want to bring it down to 2%, you need a lot, not just aggressive, but you need a lot of increase in interest rate to do that. And obviously, I hope they don't really mean it when they say we want 2% inflation rate and we will keep on increasing the interest rate up to that point. That is worrisome. And if they actually stick to that promise that they will keep on increasing the interest rate until 2% inflation rate is achieved, we got some problem, because then clearly U.S. economy will slow down even more, and then we are inviting the scenario of 1982 when we had a severe recession that time too. But that's what the situation is right now. We have problems with picking up with the international trade. We have problems with picking up the supply chain back to the normal, which, as I said, is kind of getting back to normal. We are still not there. We have some ways to go. We have a very high interest rate. We have a high inflation to worry about. And let's not forget that the technological revolution is seen a little bit in auto sector in terms of electric car, in terms of some information technology changes are there, as you know, from your modifications of your cell phones, and some computer techniques, and most of the transactions are getting into e-transactions. People are working from home efficiently. So all that is probably a technological change there, but none of these changes are significant to make a big turnaround for the US economy. And therefore, to answer the old question where we started, and the question was, is the US losing the leadership position? My answer is yes. Thanks to this slowdown of technological growth, the leadership position clearly is not as significant as it was before. But mind well, US is still the leader of the world, still producing 23 to 25% of the world GDP. And if the technological change comes back, then we may have another round of increase in the leadership position of US, because if US is not doing very good, our article shows that 3 other major competitors are doing worse. Means even if you take EU as a unison group, EU is struggling even more than US, and probably the war is making their oil supply disrupted, their wheat supply disrupted from Ukraine, and therefore EU is having even more trouble than US. Japan is clearly perpetually having more trouble than US, and the natural disasters are not helping them. China is having more trouble than US. Chinese slowdown with the pandemic is significant, and therefore, yeah. And my last comment is obviously we in India are doing much better than any of these four major economies, and therefore, if India continues to do good, maybe we will reach to a 5 trillion, 5 trillion economy, not not as predicted in 2016 or 2017, but sooner or later we are going to reach to 5 trillion if we continue the 6% growth. And I know with 6% growth, which is obviously a very impressive growth for India, if we really continue doing that, my student and I, we just recently finished a paper talking about how long will it take for the poverty reduction, because Garibi Hatao has been our motto since 1970s, and there is still Garibi in the US economy, in Indian economy, and our paper predicts that if we continue with the 6% GDP growth, then we may see a poverty reduction in 2046. In 2046, I will be 93 years old. So I will be happy to see that day of Garibi Hatao actually happening. But as I said, that is just our paper prediction of 2046. That is still very far, 24 years from now, 23 years from now. And 6%, 23 years, that will be a marvelous achievement. Doesn't matter who is in Delhi White House. Are we coloring the new house of the Prime Minister white to call it a White House? But yeah, but in Delhi White House, doesn't matter who is there. In next 23 to 24 years, it will take good time for India to actually say that we won't have any poor person in the country. Very good. With that, I will stop. I know I can go on and on with this for a long time. But as the last person must have slept by now, I should stop, because I know that was my objective, to put you to sleep. And if I have achieved that objective of putting you to sleep, then I have achieved something today. But with that, again, I thank Dr. Charan Singh for keeping me in mind to invite me for this fantastic webinar series that you have started. When I look at all the list of people working with EGROW, I feel so honored and privileged to be here with so many people at the leadership position there. And I know at least one time, oh, we got 70 participants now, so that's a wonderful number. It's people forgot to switch off the computers before going to bed, but at least that's good. There's 70 people were there, and
Yeah,
I'm happy to be here.
some time
Yes,
back
sir.
they are many more than 70.
Oh, wait, was that right?
Yes,
Okay, well, at least I managed to keep 70 here. Then thank you so
yes.
much, sir, for having me.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Charan Singh, and I hand it over to you.
I must thank you, Professor Kulkarni. It was excellent that you shared your thoughts with us. Today is the Makar Sankranti Day. We are celebrating Sankranti here in Delhi, and I was eating that corn because everybody is eating corn. And despite Makar Sankranti, if 90 people are joining,
And
you know,
sesamum as well. Yeah.
huh?
The corn and sesamum.
Absolutely. And
Yes.
if
So
on
that is
Makar,
very auspicious in India
yes,
Yes,
on this day.
absolutely.
Yes.
Well,
today is the Makar.
where I come from in Pune is a Tilgul. Yeah,
Yeah.
Yes.
distribution.
Right.
So I must thank you for an excellent talk. But Professor, before you go, one is we would be interested because EGROW did that study on India 2046-47. And I did not know that you have a paper talking about poverty in 46-47. So we would like to have a look at your paper. If you
Absolutely.
can kindly share with us. That is
Okay.
one.
Well, before you continue, also, Charanji, can I make an announcement that my journal, the Indian Journal of Economics and Business, and also my new association, I have become a president this year of a Society of Indian Academicians in America. So it is SIAA, SIAAUS.net is the website for it, SIAUS.net, and I'm the president. And SIA as well as I- IRBE, my journal, will hold a conference in Surat on December 21st and 22nd, and all of you should send a paper to us. The call for paper is the call for paper is being made right now, but the conference is coming up on December 21st and 22nd in Surat, and I would love to see many of you in Surat. Sorry about that.
So good. We will share this information with our friends all across. And if you have a flyer, please send us.
It is, yes,
We'll also
it is
invite
being made.
people. We'll put it and share with people at our forum. We would. And what is the title of the conference? 20 India
Well,
46-47.
it's going to be very general. What we are doing is we just put a title as a conference on Indian academic issues. So that way, it is not bound by any special area, as long as the paper is on India in terms of application and empirical research. We are interested in looking at that. So
You could probably consider a session or half a day, 2 sessions on India 46-47.
yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
idea.
If
Absolutely, yeah.
if you do that, we will invite some of our authors who have done work for us if they want to update their papers and share with you in
Correct.
that conference. We had
Absolutely.
recently had another conference, Indian Economic Association annual conference in Bangalore on December 26, 27, and 28 and 29. And we had a session there on India 46-47, and it was a runaway success. Everybody started thinking about India 46-47. 25 years from now, where would we be? So I would, in case you are considering a similar session, please let
We'll
us
do that.
know. We'll put it on our website. Now, Professor, the thought that is in my mind listening to your talk, you feel that America continues to be at the helm of affairs, and the American economy will continue to dominate the global economy for many more years to come, for reasons, historical reasons and technological developments that have taken place. But you also know that the Americans have suffered the most severe setback that they could have ever suffered from their subprime. And of course, you traced it from Paul Walker's 1979 experiment that he did. But then if you look at the recent times, 2004 onwards, the subprime crisis was almost brewing there, and it precipitated in the Lehman Brothers, and then you know they lost a decade. Then comes the COVID, and in COVID, they were pouring money like rain, and now they have suffered the most severe inflationary pressure, and they have most aggressively used their interest rates to douse that pressure. And as you have seen yourself, that they say till 27, probably economy will not be able to come on its even keel. Further, yesterday, Paul, the chairman of Fed Reserve, has said monetary policy really can't do much with the climate change and cannot be used as a tool to do climate policy. Now, this is where the largest economy of the world is standing. Firstly, on a lost decade, and secondly, not contributing into the most serious issue of the century, the climate. Now, what is it? do you still think it should be allowed to retain the global leadership role?
Well,
Or
go
if
ahead.
you look at the past, there was a time when the baton of the richest economy of the world was handed over from UK to America around the Second World War. Maybe time has come now to gracefully allow an emerging country to emerge as an advanced country and give the baton. And if you are not globally responsible, if at 25% of the world GDP you are only going to create carbon footprints and decarbonization is not on your agenda, then should you really be a leader? Would you be respected as a leader?
Well, actually, you are right. The respect for U.S. leadership is under question, and without doubt, U.S. has gone through some area, and I will be the first one to accept the fact that um, everything that the government is doing is expecting them to solve the problem and being very aggressive in terms of solving the problem of the US economy, which is a very wrong thing to do. And I know White House matters, but it doesn't matter as much when there is a positive economic growth, as we already mentioned here. Because it is a private sector which drives the economic growth, at least in US. And if private sector responds in the future with another technological change, then it is very doubtful that somebody else would do better than America and take that position. So who is there to take the position of leadership? China? China is probably the next candidate to do that. And Germany and Japan are probably the next one in the line. But then they are very small. 5 trillion is all that Japan produces. 4.5, 4.8 is what Germany produces. So clearly, to take the leadership position, they have to make leaps and bounds economic growth, and that is not happening. And so I agree with you that the US is obviously very irresponsible in terms of the controlling the atmosphere changes and environmental changes, and obviously not paying much attention to the pollution of the world and the depletion of ozone layer and all that. But who's going to force the superpower to do that? There is no international leader who can do that.
Very good.
Any other question?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
We'll
Charan.
open it to the audience.
Yeah.
Any other question? But please be, Professor
Charan,
Ashok Viswandas is a founder director with us at the EGROW Foundation. Professor Viswandas, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Charan. Thank you, Professor Kishore. I was listening very attentively. It was a masterful exposition, Kulkarni ji, and I really enjoyed every bit of it. And you were see, my is my thinking. Economics is one of the parameter to determine the leadership, but to my mind that's not the only one, only factor that determine. And second thing I would like to put before your consideration, respect is commanded, not demanded. Now the kind of leadership and the size of one is the size of the economy, other is the size of the country. Now for instance, a country like Germany you mentioned, can it emerge as a leader? But I find China has created so many enemies because China is driving itself very fast, and in, if I can use the slang word, is bullying so many countries. It is putting its foot on the toe of many countries, and I don't think a person who's bullying, or a nation who's unfairly, and not even let us remind ourselves, China refuses to respect the verdict of the International Court of Justice. We have seen the South China. So how China can assume the role of the global leader. That is one point. Now, there are few countries, Japan, I don't think. So, why don't you think that India can emerge as if not in next few years, sometime where India can emerge? Because India is a democratic country, is the largest country in terms of population, is going to be in next few months 1.4 billion, and then it has every ingredient to become. So what is your take on this?
Actually, you raised several good points. To answer your first question, is GDP alone is a good indicator of economic growth? Now, I know there have been studies, and of course, I believe in what the argument is that when you look at the GDP and probably look at the per capita income, the index of happiness goes 1-to-1 with the per capita income. Countries that have higher per capita income are happy, and you can use that happiness index whichever way you want. Sanitation, living conditions, standard of living, everything else is put. And there is and I know you should check that online also, that higher is the per capita income, higher is the happiness. So clearly we do want to look at GDP and per capita. In my opinion, I know there are people who, sociologists and psychologists and social worker, they all disagree with all that. But take a look at that relationship and you will be probably convinced that per capita income or GDP is a good measure. The second thing about your China being a leader is absolutely correct, because if you don't like US leadership, would you like to taken over by China and become the leader of the world? And well, my answer is, of course, no, that I don't want China to be the world leader either. But in a way, as I said, don't forget, my point is that China can never be a world leader because the per capita income is going to be only 1/3 of US, even if they reach to the exact same GDP figure as US. So it's a long way. The domination of US is so vast, as I said, not only in numbers, and for if you want to go to the defense and also the strong military, the dominance of US is clearly without. US has enough weapons to blow up this earth 3 times in a row. One time is enough. Why do you need 3 times? But that's how big the arms are with the US, and therefore forget about any other domination. I think the political domination, the defense domination, and we are purely focusing on economic domination, and that is not hurt as yet. In the future, and I'm not a very good forecaster. I don't like to make forecast. Plus, nobody listens to my forecast anyway. Not even my wife believes my forecast. So forget about anybody else believing in my forecast. But in any case, in the future, it will be decided by how fast the technological growth drives the US economy.
Now, thank you, Professor Charan Singh, for inviting me here. And it was a very exhilarating exploration into the leadership of USA on the basis of GDP and the criteria determining GDP. But then I would like to insist that there are some other factors, like how many countries use US dollar in their international trade is also equally important. And it's also the role of US dollar in SDRs, which again determines the leadership, where US has been declining as a leader for several decades from now. All the teachers of international business know this. And then it's not as if US decline in leadership would give leadership to any other country. That's the concern. There will be international confusion, it is expected. In SDS and network, it was clearly expressed that there will be inward movement of economies because of the pandemic and several other non-economic reasons which would dominate, due to which US leadership is expected and feared would decline. But then, as you said, in terms of GDP, it may not decline. However, there may be decline due to the non-economic factors, which is risky even for United States, and there will not be a replacement. That is the expectation. Neither Germany nor China nor Japan will replace USA. And that leads to international concern and then fear and economic activities declining. It may lead to confusion. That's the expectation. Thank you. I thank Professor Kishore Kulkarni very much for this beautiful exploration into
So,
the topic.
Professor Kulkarni, the point which Professor Rekha is making is a multipolar world.
Yeah.
And I see nothing wrong in a multipolar world. It will be very democratic global governance. And United Nations will be more meaningful. Right now, the United Nations is not that meaningful. Do you think that this is where we are heading?
Are we heading that? Well, as I said, it depends. It depends very much on how the US economy does in the future. And Rekha ji, without doubt, what you are saying is true, that the dominance of US has in fact gone down, but still it is still means we are talking about a reduced dominance. We remember I said 40% of the world GDP was produced by US in 1960, only 23% is produced. So leadership position of even production has gone down. The diplomatic leadership position has gone down too, as we are having more and more powerful voices all over the world which are anti-US for good reasons or the bad. And um, and so the dominance has gone up, but it is still there. And this is a reduced dominance, but it is still there. Will that continue to be reduced in the future? Only future can tell us. Nobody can, anybody who tells you they know the future correctly, they are outright lying to you. And I know they're lying to me too, but it is our job to not believe them, because this is clearly we don't really know what's going to happen in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now. And maybe, but then again, the question still remains, then who will do that?
Yeah.
And if you are arguing for India, I agree that, as I said, India is doing a marvelous job of a 6% GDP growth. But India is small player. I mean, we need to understand that
India will not.
when you're talking about 23 trillion as against 3 and 4 trillion GDP, we are still not a leader of the world as yet. I mean, I know I'm Indian at heart, even if I'm so much away. All my work is on India, and I love India. And in 47 years, I must have made at least 40 trips to India for lecture purposes and all other things. But clearly, we are proud of what India has done in the last 20-25 years. And hopefully we will continue with that. As I said, if we continue doing that for 23 more years, we may have a fantastic India where the Garibi is actually gone from here. So,
Yeah, that's right.
My reading, I must thank all of you for making the discussion so rich. My projection, Professor Kulkarni, is India will reduce poverty, and the way Americans are going, they will increase poverty in their country. This is my reading. And if you look at 2008, and you know I was there from 2009 to 2012 in Washington, traveling everywhere, even your place, you must have noticed the evidence that the people below the poverty line, whatever is their poverty line, that was almost increasing at that time. And I feel after COVID and after the recent inflationary and sacrifice ratio that will be now invoked because of aggressive interest rate, this poverty figures are again going to look up in America relatively. On the other hand, India has been doing exceedingly well on these issues. Now, I am of course not going to debate, and it's not possible to even argue that America is in a polar position because their per capita income is already $60,000. We are around $2,000. Their GDP is around 20 trillion. Our GDP is around 2.5 to 3 trillion. We're no match at all. But 25 years is a long time, and maybe the dollar will continue to dominate maybe America will continue to dominate, but I think the probability of a multipolar world with India playing an important role, I think, will emerge. On the other point that you made, and I totally like it, it is the choice between the deep sea and the devil. How many countries would like to be under the umbrella of China? I totally agree with you. But when the transition was taking place from UK to US, how many countries would have really liked to give up US and go under UK? You give up UK and go under US. And by the way, now the more research that is being undertaken in India, human rights record of the British rulers is not sterling by any standards. And if you look at the Indian history and look at the Kalapani, Andaman Nicobar Island jail, the cellular jail, I increasingly feel, who are these people to preach us on human rights? Right? So the point I'm making is, whenever a transition takes place, it's never a peaceful transition. There is always reluctance. Some people will like it, some will not like it. With some countries, you'll be friendly, with others, you'll not be friendly. But that's all the side story. The key story is, and I totally endorse your conclusion, America is here to stay. And at least in foreseeable future of 25, 30 years, it seems will continue to enjoy the prime location. And I totally agree with that. Despite my sharing these few thoughts in the last few minutes, you know, I know, pound sterling cannot be ignored. London still continues to be the financial center for many markets. The pound sterling is still a very strong currency. So I totally agree with you. Given the legacy, given the historical technological progress that America has recorded, it's going to be America again, at least for the next 25 years. So I must thank you for your time and waking up at 7:30 and delivering the talk on a Friday. I totally respect that sentiment. And I thank you for accepting my invitation and coming on a Friday morning. And this talk of yours, ours, will be on our website by noon tomorrow. And I'm sure many of your friends would be interested in listening to this. Please feel free to share. And we are also going to share with many of our friends here. Once again, I would like you to send me the flyer of your conference, and we'll share with our larger team. And we would like to keep alive this thought on India 4647.
Very good.
There's an important announcement to be made. Next week, we have Professor Nirvikar from University of California, Santa Cruz, speaking to us again on India and the global economy. So in a similar vein, like Professor Kulkarni, we'll have a discussion next week. And because he's in California, still west of Professor Kulkarni, we may have to schedule it at 8:30 p.m. next Friday. So we would welcome you all to please come and take advantage of these lovely discussions on the global economy and role of India. Thank you very much once again, and have a great Makar Sankranti and a great Friday, Professor Kulkarni.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Charan.
Thank you.